They said I was too young to lead a national campaign, that I should learn how to stay behind the camera before thinking about reshaping the media landscape. And yet, it was those same people who took the strategies I wrote, the ideas I stayed up nights perfecting, and used them to secure a six-figure contract with one of the largest food brands on the East Coast. My name is Jules LeBlanc, former creative content director at an ad agency in Denver, Colorado, or more precisely, someone who once held that title. And this story doesn't begin with failure. It begins with a misplaced belief. I stepped into the marketing industry through an unconventional door. No Ivy League school, no MBA. Just a suburban kid from Boise who happened to make a local bakery campaign for my mother go viral. Everything started from an old laptop in a dusty garage, a demo video made with free software, and a shaky voiceover that came from the heart. That video caught the eye of a creative director from Madison and Keene, a mid-sized agency with big ambitions. They brought me to Denver. I moved into a tiny loft with a balcony that looked out at the Rockies and started a new chapter, believing that, if I worked hard enough, fairness would eventually knock on my door. 3 years later, I became the youngest content lead at the company, not because I was the best, but because I was always the last one in the office. I stayed until 2 a.m. to save deadlines. I prepared pitch decks for other people's presentations. I dropped ideas into team chats only to see them resurface under someone else's name in the meeting room. I knew it was happening, but I thought if I just stayed quiet and worked harder, I'd eventually be recognized among the people I trusted. None stood out more than Kayla Morgan, a seasoned strategist with a gentle smile and a knack for saying the right thing at the right time. She once told me I reminded her of herself when she was just starting out. We often stayed late together, adjusting pitches, exchanging feedback, and for the first time in this cold industry, I thought I had found something solid, something human. The turning point came in early spring. A national organic food brand was looking to reinvent itself, aiming to connect with Gen Z consumers. I was the first to catch the insight. I crafted the Live Your Truth strategy based on raw emotional drivers, not gimmicks. I wrote the tagline, built the mood board, worked with design to develop the full prototype. At every meeting, I was the one leading, presenting, refining, and defending the vision. Kayla would nod supportively, occasionally adding a thought or two, always reminding the room, this is Jules's vision. I'm just helping with the edges. I believed her. I believed every word she said. Until the day of the pitch, I remember it clearly. Snow was falling lightly outside the windows. I wore my charcoal blazer, laptop in hand, and walked into the room only to find every seat already taken. I stood for a few seconds, confused. Kayla turned, smiled, and said, Jules, thank you for sending the files. I'll handle the presentation today. I didn't understand. I forced a laugh and asked, wait, I thought I was pitching, but Logan Barrett, the executive director, glanced at me like I was a misplaced intern. Kayla's representing the creative team today. You can relax. I stepped out, into the control room behind the glass, and watched every single slide I had created appear on screen. Kayla spoke every line I had written, told the story I had shaped, and was met with applause I could hear through the wall. I couldn't stay until the end. I walked out as Logan shook hands with the client, and Kayla accepted an invitation to lunch to go over details. That afternoon, I wasn't invited to the debrief. When I opened my laptop, I saw that every document I had created had been reassigned to Kayla's name. My comments, my edits, even my version history were gone like they never existed. I called Elias Duval, our lead engineer, and one of my first friends at the agency. He didn't pick up, By evening, I received an email from HR saying my position would be temporarily reassigned, and I was encouraged to take personal leave for wellness reasons. I sat alone in my apartment, the dim light casting a blurred golden stripe across the ceiling. My phone buzzed nonstop with congratulations from coworkers, all celebrating the Feel More, Live True campaign that everyone now believed belonged to Kayla. No one asked me anything. My cup of tea had gone cold on the table. I looked down at the desk, where a few handwritten notes from my original idea were still lying open. It all felt absurd. Years of silent effort. Every time I told myself that true value would be recognized, I believed that, but silence didn't earn anyone's respect. It just made it easier for them to erase me. The next morning, it became official. It wasn't a break. It was termination due to creative misalignment. No one said the word betrayal, but the truth didn't need to be spoken. I had been betrayed by the person I trusted the most. My work had been stolen by someone I thought was on my side, and I was removed from the company so cleanly. I had no room to react. My email access was cut, my calendar wiped, even my drive permissions revoked. It all happened in less than 24 hours. I didn't get a chance to explain, and no one cared enough to ask. Everyone was too busy reposting Kayla's LinkedIn article, hashtagging emotion-driven marketing. I sat with my box of personal items in hand, cold wind brushing through the hallway of our headquarters. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry, just a hollow quiet that had no name. I used to believe that if you did good work and stayed true, people would see it. But that day, I realized that truth doesn't always weigh as much as proximity to the spotlight. I left the building not feeling like I lost a job, but like my entire journey had been deleted. No one remembered Jules LeBlanc, the person who built the year's most talked about campaign. They only remembered Kayla Morgan, who spoke with calm eyes and spotless hands. And in that moment, I understood. I had been pushed all the way to the bottom, and in that place, faith wasn't strength. It was something that made you easier to break. But sometimes, it's only after the deepest falls that the kind of rise begins, one that no one sees coming. I used to think that losing my job was the hardest blow life could deliver. But in truth, the more painful part came afterward, when I stepped out into the world and no longer knew who I was without that business card. For weeks after I left the company, I drifted through my days in a fog. I deleted Slack, unfollowed everyone on LinkedIn, turned off email notifications, and declined every invitation for coffee catch-ups. I didn't want to hear about how Kayla was invited onto podcasts or how the Feel More campaign was now part of branding classes in digital marketing programs. I didn't want to know anything, at least not for a while. Then one day, while sitting alone in a quiet cafe in 5 Points, absent-mindedly turning a lukewarm cappuccino in my hands, I overheard a conversation at the next table. A group of communication students were discussing a hands-on course that included materials from the Feel More campaign. They debated the authenticity of storytelling and its power to move people. One young woman said she didn't believe a campaign like that could come from someone just chasing awards. She said, "It feels like it was written by someone who's really lived it." I froze for a moment, a sharp heat rising in my throat. Not because she was wrong, but because she had just described me. The problem was, no one remembered that name anymore. That night, for the first time in over a month, I opened my laptop. The hard drive still held folders named after half-formed ideas. One folder was labeled One Day, a quiet collection of notes for an independent agency I once dreamed of building. If only I had enough time and courage. I read through a few old strategy drafts and scattered outlines, and for the first time in weeks, my heartbeat shifted. I realized I was still here. No one can truly take away what you build with your own hands. They can only bury it if you let them. I began writing everything from scratch, not out of revenge, not yet, but to see if there was anything left inside me that could rebuild from zero. I rented a small workspace in a shared office in Rhino, just a desk by the window, on my first day. I looked around and saw others quietly hunched over screens, writing code, editing videos, strangers to the spotlight, but it felt like the place where real light begins. I named the new project Basin Studio, not after me, not after anything flashy, just a word to remind myself of the lowest place, the basin, the bottom, where people start drawing up the truest things. I had no budget, no team, no contacts left from my old job, but for the first time, I realized I had something far more valuable, the perspective of someone who had been betrayed. I built the work philosophy around one principle: marketing through emotion, not effects. I didn't chase big clients. I knocked on the doors of small shops, local startups, handmade brands that needed to be understood more than they needed to be polished. I shot my own footage, wrote my own scripts, built every bit of content from scratch. There were nights I fell asleep at my desk editing a case study for a tiny organic sandwich shop in Boulder. Some mornings I skipped meals because I couldn't afford an Uber to a client meeting all the way in Aurora, but not once did I feel lost. The challenges never stopped coming. Once, a startup turned me down because I lacked an online profile. Another time, a client skipped out on paying for 2 months. I had to craft a debt collection email so carefully worded I barely recognized my own voice. But every time I was pushed into a corner, I remembered the look in Kayla's eyes that day, and the quiet smirk Logan wore as he signed my dismissal without the decency of eye contact. They thought I would disappear, but their belief in my failure became the very thing that kept me steady. By the 3rd month, a nonprofit in Fort Collins reached out, asking me to lead the branding for a campaign supporting young people starting careers in sustainable farming. They had seen a short video I made for a hydroponic farm. The budget was modest, but the creative freedom was total. I asked the young farmers why they chose to leave the city and return to the land. I filmed them with dirt on their hands and light in their eyes. I built the story around real value, a concept they were living, not just dreaming. The video was shared over 400,000 times in a week. An eco-tool company from Ohio contacted the nonprofit for collaboration. My name wasn't mentioned, but I saw Basin Studio in the final credits. For the first time in months, I cried, not because I had won, but because I knew I was heading in the right direction. I began to believe again, not in other people, but in my own ability to stand, even when no one stood behind me. I learned how to turn down collaboration offers from faces who had stayed silent when I was being pushed out. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need to return to the old agency. I didn't need a title to do what I believed was right. And in that quiet space, during those unglamorous steps, I realized I was doing more than recovering. I was redrawing the entire map of my life, this time with my own hands and not from anyone's shadow. I was no longer Jules LeBlanc of Madison and Keene. I was Jules of Basin, someone who knew every contour of failure and every scar left by broken trust. I hadn't made a dramatic comeback. I hadn't delivered a turnaround that made the world take notice. But I had looked into the mirror without shame, and that was the strongest beginning I had ever known. I never planned to return, not in the way people talk about coming back to prove something or to take back what was theirs. But destiny has a strange way of pulling you back to the very place that once pushed you out. It started unremarkably, the way all big things tend to. An email landed in the Basin Studio inbox from a mid-sized organic food company based in California. They were preparing to expand into the Midwest and wanted an agency that understood local culture well enough to lead the launch campaign. The message was signed by Nora Whitman, their newly appointed brand director. She wrote that she had seen my videos for the nonprofit in Fort Collins and was struck by the way I told stories authentically, without emotional manipulation. I reread that line several times, not because it praised me, but because I knew those words could only come from someone who had been touched at their core. Our first meeting took place at a small diner by the lake in Salt Lake City. I arrived on time, in a white shirt with my laptop in hand. No polished pitch deck, just my story told plainly, like someone who had lost faith and was learning how to walk again. Nora didn't interrupt. She listened closely, nodding when I said that a broken trust hurts longer than failure ever will. At the end, she placed her hand on the table and said, "I used to work at Madison and Keene. I know what happened to you." I didn't reply. Nora gave a faint smile. They replaced me too. We didn't say anything else, but in her eyes, I knew I didn't need to retell the old story. She had already heard enough versions of it from others. This time, I was chosen not because of a referral, but because of the cracks that had settled visibly on what used to be a smooth surface. The project launched within 3 weeks. Basin Studio was given full authority over content direction, media strategy, visuals, and grassroots engagement. I developed the concept Grow Slow, Live True, inspired by the philosophy of slowing down to live more genuinely, a direct contrast to the fast, fabricated campaigns dominating the market. I invited farmers, single mothers, and local artists to be part of the storytelling process. No actors, no scripts, just the camera rolling as they shared their real lives. And then something I never expected happened. A behind-the-scenes clip, completely unedited, captured a man arranging produce in a cold storage room as he talked about leaving his job as a production supervisor to return to farming. A TikTok micro-influencer reposted it within 3 days. The video had over 2 million views. The hashtag #CheerGrowSlow started trending on Instagram. Users shared stories echoing the phrase "slow down to live true," flooding their personal feeds. I didn't pay for any of it. I didn't boost it. It rose like a wave from the ground up, unstoppable. 3 weeks later, I received an email from a familiar address I never thought I'd see again. Kayla Morgan Keen, calm. The subject line had only 3 words. "Can we talk?" I left it unread for 3 days. But then another message came, this time from Elias Duval, my old friend and now the company's chief technology officer. "There's something you should know." He wrote, "I met Elias at an old bar in lower downtown. He was late, looking more tired and tense than I remembered. As soon as he set his glass down, he spoke without preamble. 'Your campaign has our media team in panic mode. Clients are asking why Madison and Keene didn't propose something like Basin Studios' approach.' I smiled faintly, said nothing. He continued, 'There are rumors. A major client is about to pull out.' Then he paused. 'Kayla wants to reconnect. She's thinking about buying Basin or offering a partnership.' I couldn't help but tilt my head and smile, not because I felt triumphant, but because it was finally their turn to feel control slipping through their hands. The next day, Kayla sent a message through WhatsApp. No apology, no mention of the past, just a proposal to strategize together and become stronger as a team. I didn't reply right away. I went on LinkedIn and scrolled through her recent posts. Her headline now read, "Chief Strategy Officer, Madison and Keene." But the comments caught my eye. Someone had asked, "Did you really lead the Feel More campaign back then?" Another wrote. The tone of "grow slow" reminds me of someone else. I didn't know who they were, but I could feel it, the undercurrent beginning to turn. The truth, however slowly, always finds a way to rise, as if it's been alive this whole time, just waiting for its moment. The climax came when Nora called late one night. I had just turned off the lights when my phone rang. Her voice was tense. "We need to launch earlier than planned. A big firm is about to release a similar campaign. Different name, same concept." I asked who it was. She said just one word, M&K. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and drew back the curtain. Light rain drifted down. Something old stirred in my chest. Not fear, a kind of awakening. I opened my laptop, reviewed every script, clip, behind-the-scenes log, and production journal. Everything was documented with care. I never create without leaving a clear, traceable path, because I've learned that those who betray you once will always try again. Same pattern, new lines. 2 days later, Grow Slow, Live True, launched across the western states with the support of more than 40 micro-influencers. The main video was shared by a singer who had once made it to the Voice finals and used to be sponsored by Madison and Keene this time. He publicly thanked Basin Studio in his post. I didn't expect that. But when I saw the words, "Thank you, Jules LeBlanc, for reminding us that being real never goes out of style," I simply nodded. The following day, Kayla called. I let the phone ring out. Then came a message. I never imagined things would turn out this way. I read it while adjusting the color tone for a poster on our next campaign. No emotion, no urgency, because I knew their collapse wouldn't come as a loud explosion. It would arrive through the small cracks they kept trying to hide. And now, everything was starting to give way. Some mornings you wake up and just know something has shifted. Not because of anything you see or hear, but because your instincts whisper it. That morning's silence felt different. My phone didn't buzz with messages. My inbox held no urgent alerts, but the air in my apartment felt thick, as if holding back something about to break. I opened my laptop, not to work, but just to revisit what I had built. On the screen was the refreshed landing page for Grow Slow, which I had adjusted the night before. The background was a muted earth tone, and the video auto-played with a young woman standing in a sunlit field, saying, "We don't grow products, we nurture real value." I knew that, if anyone made it to the 30th second, they'd understand this wasn't just a campaign. It was a quiet reminder of what marketing had forgotten for too long, that emotion doesn't need to be dressed up to matter. Less than an hour later, an email from Nora appeared. The subject line was just 4 words. "They've made a statement." Inside was a link to a post on Madison and Keene's official page. A cold announcement denied all accusations of idea theft, claiming instead that this was a coincidence in strategic direction among creative agencies exploring social value. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't angry either. I just felt a strange lightness, as if I had finally been acknowledged as a threat, not a forgotten name left behind after a meeting, but someone worth responding to publicly. That afternoon, I accepted an invitation to speak at a creative summit in Santa Fe, a gathering of independent storytellers who had left big agencies to forge their own path. I had intended to decline, but then I remembered the look in Elias's eyes at the bar when he said, "You don't need revenge. Just show them you're still here." I flew to Santa Fe with no PowerPoint, no visuals, just a story from someone who had been cut out of the game, and how she came back by using the very thing that once made her expendable. I ended my talk with a question. What's the worth of success if it's built with borrowed hands and someone else's voice? The room fell silent. Then came applause, not thunderous, but steady, like a pulse finding its rhythm after a long quiet. A journalist from Brand Truth was there that day, 3 days later. The article titled "The Quiet Storyteller and Her Reversal of Fortune" became the most shared piece on marketing Twitter that week. They called it a comeback for Jules Leblanc. But to me, it was just the result of not stopping when others expected me to disappear. Momentum began to build. A fintech startup in Minneapolis reached out to have Basin Studio lead their brand strategy for a microfinance product. A public health nonprofit invited us to create a video series about post-pandemic grief and resilience, most unexpectedly. 3 former clients from Madison and Keene sent quiet messages asking if I was open to one-on-one consultations. I hadn't approached anyone, but I didn't turn them away either, not if they came seeking the truth. And truth has a way of coming back on its own when you stop chasing it. While all that was unfolding, a message appeared on my phone. No preamble, no small talk, just a screenshot of a chat between Kayla and a client, in which she had accidentally forwarded a strategic script with her name on it. But the metadata showed it was my original draft, written over a year ago. The message was sent from an anonymous account, signed only as someone who once believed in her. I didn't know who it was. Maybe it was the intern I once helped revise a resume for, maybe a former teammate who saw me quietly tweak their wireframes to meet a deadline. I didn't need to know. What mattered was clear the wall they built with gloss and well-crafted words was beginning to crack from within, one brick at a time. A few days later, I was invited to appear as a guest on a live talk show hosted by a major video platform. The topic was broken trust and the strength in silence. At the end of the episode, the host asked me one final question. If you could go back to the day you were betrayed, what would you do differently? I smiled and replied, I'd keep everything the same, because the day I thought I lost everything taught me I no longer need anyone to validate my real worth. There was no music cue, no dramatic spotlight, but the episode surpassed 3 million views in under a week, not because I was famous, but because my story was one that thousands had lived, betrayed, erased, pushed out, yet still choosing to move forward quietly. On the last night of the month, I returned to the old apartment where I once pinned the first mood boards for Grow Slow. The walls had chipped paint. The wooden chair was bent at the corner, but the golden light still spilled across the floor with the same gentle touch it had from the start. I sat down, opened our newest project file, and looked at the handwritten notes that had now become guiding principles for an entire studio. I knew I had reached a place where I could no longer be erased. I didn't need to tell Kayla anything. I didn't expect Elias to speak up for me in any internal meetings. What I needed was already visible, clear enough, strong enough, and lasting enough to live beyond the reach of anyone who once denied me. My greatest turning point wasn't a high-value contract or a viral article. It was the moment I realized I could look anyone in the eye, anyone who once doubted me, and no longer feel the need to prove a thing, not because they had changed their minds, but because I no longer needed them to. For the first time, I felt ready, not just to keep going, but to step fully into the light with a calm I had never known. I was no longer a shadow walking behind anyone. I was the one redrawing the map, and this game, now, was rewriting the name of its rulemaker. I didn't choose to come back with a declaration or a dramatic display. I didn't need to appear on rankings, nor did I need anyone to call my name at a celebration. My return happened quietly, piece by piece, in the surprised looks of those who once turned away, in the long pauses during meetings where my name now appeared on the top line of proposals instead of fading beneath the footnotes. I had risen, not by walking into rooms, but by making those rooms speak my name even in my absence. And the strange thing is, once you no longer need to prove yourself. Everything around you starts doing the proving for you. One early winter morning, I received an official invitation from a National Alliance of Creative Enterprises, asking me to join the advisory board for a brand-building program targeting young startups. One line in the letter made me pause. This initiative was originally led by Madison and Keene, but after reassessing our direction, we've decided to pursue a more grounded and ethical approach. I didn't respond right away. I just opened the email, read it once, and then closed it. I brewed myself a cup of tea, and in the soft fragrance rising from the porcelain mug, I felt something deeply complete, quiet, but whole. Around that time, Basin Studios secured our largest contract to date. A wellness technology group chose us to redefine their entire brand journey. They didn't just want strategy, they wanted a story. They needed someone who understood that products related to human health couldn't be built on ROI metrics alone. They had to be built on trust and emotion. I hadn't sent a proposal. I hadn't pitched. They called me because what I had created had reached places no data ever could. They wanted Jules's language, as their creative director said. Meanwhile, news about Madison and Keene began to surface. A major client terminated their contract early, citing inconsistent brand messaging and internal ethics violations. Small reports turned into a stream. A former employee shared their experience of being forced to revise a strategy to disguise an idea that wasn't theirs. An independent journalist released a 3-part investigation that included evidence from past campaigns showing signs of creative structure reuse without proper sourcing. I read each article, not out of spite, but to make sure that this time, the truth wasn't being pushed to the back again. Kayla Morgan disappeared from social media shortly after the second article went live. A week later, I received an unsigned email with no formal formatting, just a few lines. I know no words can change what happened, but I'm truly sorry. For the silence, for taking what was yours, and for not having the courage to speak up when it mattered. I read it, then left it there. No reply, no deletion, no forwarding. Some apologies aren't meant to be accepted or rejected. They simply belong where they are behind you. During that same stretch, Basin Studio was invited to become the creative partner for a social investment fund in Seattle, focused on supporting businesses with community-driven and sustainable models. For the first time, we had enough funding to expand, to hire more people, and to pay fair wages for the effort they brought. I saw a few familiar faces from the days at Madison and Keene, now reaching out not out of loyalty, but because they said, I want to work where real values aren't just slogans. I made no promises. I simply said, if you're ready, we'll rebuild from the ground up, but this time, we don't need anyone standing in the middle. On the day we officially launched the Breathe Better, Live Deeper campaign for our healthcare partner, I stood backstage, no microphone, no stage entrance. My team led the presentation, answered every question, and held the room with a calm that didn't need rehearsing. I watched the light catch in their hair, heard the steadiness in their voices, saw the focus in their eyes. No one mentioned Jules LeBlanc, but I knew every detail on that slide deck was the result of a chain of trust passed down through choices I made when I refused to trade truth for recognition. I don't know where Kayla is now. I don't know whether Elias stayed or found a different path. But I do know Madison and Keene is no longer the name people trust by default. They didn't fall because of me. They fell because of their own choices. I never had to break anything down. I simply didn't stop it from collapsing once its foundations cracked. One quiet weekend afternoon, I sat alone in our new office, where glass walls looked out over the historic row houses of Capitol Hill. Sunlight streamed across the walnut desk, where a small plaque read, "Silence is not weakness, it is strategy." I thought back to everything that had passed, from the day I was pushed out of the meeting I had built from scratch, to this morning when Basin was invited to partner with the Department of Agriculture on a national food safety initiative. No one questions whether I'm capable anymore. No one tells me to learn how to stay in the background. I don't need to stand in front. I just need to make sure that every step now carries the weight of honesty and resolve. I used to think revenge was what I needed to feel justice, but the truth is, what carried me through wasn't satisfaction. It was the moment I realized I no longer felt trapped in someone else's story. When you stand up, move forward, and build a world not to prove anything, but simply to live in alignment with the best parts of yourself, that is the real comeback. And when the ones who betrayed you fall by the very tools they used to climb, you don't need to speak, because by then, your silence says everything that needs to be said.